I started this channel a few years ago as I was on a journey to read the Bible and become more familiar with it, something I hadn't done previously in my life. And part of that was getting to know different translations and trying them out. In this video, I'm going to share 5 translations that have stood out either because I use them a lot during this process or I continue to use them a lot. And I thought it would just be interesting to share my thoughts and experience with that. I am not doing this from the perspective of a scholar or someone who can read the original languages. I'm not a minister. I'm just laity sharing my own personal observations and thoughts. So let's get into it. I wouldn't necessarily say these are in any particular order, but then they kind of are. It's fair to say that as we go down the line, the translations towards the end are going to be the ones that have had a bigger impact or that I am more likely to continue to use regularly. So let's start with number 5. Number 5 is the Revised English Bible. Revised English Bible came out in 1989, and it's kind of unique as an American Christian. It's British. It's kind of mainline Catholic, ecumenical British translation. It's a very literary translation, so it just has a unique sort of feel to it. I quite like it, along with the New English Bible that it was based on. I ended up reading, probably a third of the New Testament in the REB translation. I used it quite a bit one year when I was allowing myself to just use different translations and see how I liked them. Now, it does at times get way too loose. Given its literary character, it will, translate something a certain way because it sounds really good or very poetic, but maybe it's not necessarily a good literal translation. I feel like it does push the boundaries way too far in places. I talked about that a little bit in a previous video on the NEB. With that said, though, I still quite like it and enjoyed using it. I don't know how much I'll use it going forward. I really want to like it a lot and use it. I think just because it is kind of it's just not been as popular as some other translations, and there's some things I love. I love Psalms 42 and 43 in here, which is why I have them marked. But yeah, it just, sometimes I love it, sometimes I don't. It just hasn't stuck with me as well as other translations have. This particular one, this is the Oxford Study Bible. Most of these I've seen are a soft cover. This one's a hardcover. I haven't really used the notes in it that much. Nothing against them. It's pretty lightly annotated. I just haven't used it as a reference. I really got this because it's just very well printed. So it's just a great REB to read from. I recommend it. The next translation is the New Living Translation. This originally came out in 1996. It was last revised in 2015. And it's a very well-known, popular translation, at least here in the U.S. I imagine it's got some use elsewhere as well. It's easy to read. It reads like the kind of English that, at least to me, that me and, say, probably a lot of Americans speak in our day-to-day encounters. It's just a very straightforward, easy to read English. It's great for reading out loud. And yeah, this is the translation I've actually read most of the Bible in, because when I was really on a run to read the whole Bible, this made it a lot easier for me to read through, kind of get the general overview of things, and work on the details and things more in other more literal translations. Now, there's pluses and minuses, of course. Because it's easier to read, a lot of that comes from the fact that, as Tim Frisch puts it, it spoon feeds. It takes difficult to understand concepts and words, things that someone who's maybe fairly new to Christianity might stumble on, and it kind of explains them instead of just translating words or transliterating. To do that, of course, you're going to color it a bit theologically, and it's a very evangelical translation. I don't think it's bad in any way because of that. It's just something to be aware of. Now, the earlier versions of it, like the 1996 edition, were perhaps a lot more, had a lot more offenses in that and a lot more criticism lobbed at it. It's, I think, best to use a later version of the translation. So I don't recommend using the 90s version. Get the second edition at least, which I think was in 2007. Yeah, that way you're getting, I think, the best version of the NLT. What else can we say about it? Yeah, I mean, like I say, I like it. It's about as close to a paraphrase as I'm really comfortable with. I don't use or care too much for paraphrases because I'm always wondering, well, what does it really say, or what did they do here that might be masking something, or implying something that's not necessarily there. Now, I have that with the NLT as well. I tend to use it mostly in this study Bible, which does a great job with the notes. This is the NLT Study Bible. I like this a lot. There comes an illustrated version, which is still in print. I don't know if this one still is. The new illustrated editions have a sewn binding, I've heard, so that's good. This doesn't, and it is falling apart a little bit, but yeah, I think if you're looking for something that you can read easily, read through quickly, get kind of into the text, use for reading aloud, this is great. It's not something I'd necessarily use in church, but for personal study, I don't have any problem with the NLT. The third translation is one that I think we all should know, which is the King James Version. And I have here an old Oxford leather-bound King James Version Bible, very, classic and stately looking King James, the kind of thing, right, you'd find on your grandfather's bookshelf. This is, of course, a very popular, long-standing translation. I was initially quite hesitant about using the King James Version. It seemed very, kind of a little scary, like it's going to be too hard to read. The English is going to be too hard. Also, just all the KJV onlyism that you encounter online really kind of turned me off from the translation, the way that people talk about it, and all that I don't agree with. But I did eventually come around, and I'm glad I did. I started using it because I was using the Book of Common Prayer, the American 1928 version, for personal devotions. Started doing that increasingly, and typically you use the King James Version with the classic prayer books. You don't have to, but it's kind of like peanut butter and jelly, right? And that's what Cradle of Prayer uses when they record their prayer services. So I've come to really love the language. There's some really beautiful parts of the King James Version. Like we're in the Psalms right now. I mean, everybody knows, right? Psalm 23 on the other page there. Great in the King James Version. The opening to Hebrews. There's others. Some of the Lamentations. I love Lamentations in the King James Version. Yeah, it is. It's just a magnificent translation. I think it's well worth the effort to get comfortable reading it. And the fact is, it's so highly influential. It's still influential on our modern Bible translations. We have several translations that are based or kind of trace their lineage to the King James Version, like ESV, NRSV, RSV, NASB, others, even translations that don't. The King James Version still affects a lot of the ways we look at certain passages and how we translate things, or what sounds correct to us, especially when we're at church at Christmas time or other seasons where we have really well-known and well-loved scriptures. Luke 2 in the King James Version, my favorite version. Want to hear that every December. The other thing is, besides Bible translation, the King James Version is influential in the English-speaking world in general. The fact is, many people who have never even opened a Bible will know certain phrases or manners of speech from the King James language, because it's so entrenched in our English-speaking world. So, judge not lest ye be judged, that kind of thing. Everybody knows that, even if they don't read the Bible. So just well worth, I think, for all Christians to have a King James Version Bible and be familiar with it. And the great thing is, if you like to thrift like I do, you may find a really nice version eventually. If you keep looking, this is a really nice leather-bound Oxford. I found this for $1 at a library sale. Calfskin. A little worn, but not too bad. For a new one, my recommendation is the New Cambridge Paragraph Bible. I like the layout. It also adds quotation marks around speech, which is really helpful. I love that. And this is a leather edition with a slipcase. This is, I think, the older artwork, which I love. You can get this as a hardcover. You can also get the Penguin, what is it called? Penguin Classics Bible, English Bible. It's a Penguin King James Bible, which has this same layout, just minus the marginal notes. So great options for new King James Bibles. Okay, the fourth Bible is the CSB, the Christian Standard Bible. This was a revision of the Holman Christian Standard Bible, the HCSB, and I really do not know the years these things came out, but this is the most recent revision of the CSB, which is from 2020. I came to use this because I had people, both people I know and people I follow, that use it and recommend it strongly, and I finally decided, hey, I'm going to try it out, and I read the New Testament in the CSB one year, and I enjoyed it. It's easy to read, but it's still fairly literal, so I think it reads really well. It reads like a very kind of contemporary English, but it's not spoon-feeding or paraphrasing as much as like the NLT does. So, it's not going to hold your hand all the time, but it does read like just everyday English. So I appreciate that. There's just a lot of things I love. I love that it just, standardizes any Old Testament quotations are in bold, like we see here: do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal. And so they stand out in the New Testament, and then the references are always available. So it's a great translation for looking at New Testament usage of the Old. And honestly, I think one of the things that probably sold me the most was this particular Bible. This layout is fantastic. I love single column Bibles, and this is just a great layout. This is the single column wide margin something. Yeah. I can't remember the exact name, but I've got a video where I reviewed it a while back. Yeah, I love too that the CSB, it feels to me fairly neutral. I've heard some others say that, and I haven't done like a deep study to back that up or anything, but I feel like it does a pretty good job of being a fairly neutral evangelical translation. This is my go-to, conservative evangelical, whatever you want to say, translation right here. What else is there to say? Yeah, I just like it. It just gives something a little different compared to some of the other popular translations, and it's become quite popular in itself. So, yeah, I like it. I think, the other thing I meant to say about the CSB is this would probably be my go-to translation. If I just had to pick one translation that I was going to use in a Bible study group, or to if I was going to speak in front of a church, and you said, well, I can only pick one, and I don't know what verse I'm going to read ahead of time, I feel like this is the one I'd pick. I feel like it'd be easy enough for people to understand. It's not going to do anything that's going to, I think, be too, what I want to say, strange to most Christians. I feel like it's just a good general purpose Bible translation. So, yeah. All right, and the last translation is the New Revised Standard Version. This came out initially in 1989. It was most recently revised in 2021. I just have all of mine are 1989, and we'll come back to that. But this was the first, I guess, serious Bible translation I used after the NLT. I just felt a need to have something that was more literal, not so much a paraphrase, and through who I was reading and listening to at the time and my own research, I encountered the NRSV and I chose it. Now, already some people are hearing NRSV and there's certain thoughts and ideas, and it gets criticized quite a bit I feel like generally in American Christianity, but I think a lot of that is the fact it's an ecumenical translation. It's used a lot in mainline Protestant churches, scholarly usage, seminaries, universities. I know some Catholics use it, and probably some others, but it's not an evangelical translation. So it makes some translation choices that are different from more broadly evangelical translations. Isaiah 7:14 is a real obvious one that comes to mind. Young woman instead of virgin. The way it handles some of the Son of Man language, things like that. We're not going to get into all those details. Now, I actually have appreciated that because it's made me aware of how and why certain things are translated the way they are. Doesn't mean I always agree with it or always like what it does, but I think overall it's a fine translation. There's things where I go, Usually there's a note in the margin, though, that has the more maybe traditional, we might say, version of that. And I don't know. I've found it helpful, and I'm used to it, and I continue to use it. I also like how it reads. It kind of feels very Bible-ish. The language sounds like the Bible. It's a little bit stately. It's got that King James Version influence that's come down to it. I like how it reads. Inevitably, if you use the NRSV, especially if you're someone like me who's I don't have a strong, I'm not strongly evangelical or, mainline Protestant or whatever you want to. I grew up in the UMC, but they gave us NIVs when I was a kid in the UMC. It's not like they gave us all NRSVs. So, so it's like, well, why do you use it instead of the ESV? I've had people ask me that, that's like, if you use one, it implies you don't use the other. The ESV is more traditional, more conservative in how it translates things. I actually do prefer generally a kind of more traditional conservative renderings for a lot of things, but I just find the NRSV, I don't know, it's easier to read. I'm more used to it. I think it just reads better. And yes, there's things the NRSV does that I don't really care for. There's things the ESV does that I don't really care for. It seems like the big sticking point for a lot of people, the ESV, at least the 2016 edition, is I think Genesis 3:16. So every translation has issues. I do use the ESV for certain things. I've prayed through the Psalms in the ESV a couple times. That's not something I'd probably do with the NRSV. So, I don't know. Maybe I'm just contrarian too. I don't really love how the ESV has become the sort of gold standard evangelical translation. It's just grown and grown and grown in popularity, which, that's fine. Great for Crossway. They know how to sell it and market it, and they do a great job. I'm jealous of a lot of the really wonderful editions they put out, but I stick with the NRSV. Even when I don't like something it does, I'm aware of the issues. So, what else can I say about it? And I think another thing I really like about the NRSV, and I haven't even begun to flip through this at all, is the fact I do like the ecumenical nature of it, and that's something that's a kind of a dirty word for a lot of people, but the fact I've used the NRSV and talked about it online has connected me with other Christians from various denominations and traditions that I may not otherwise connect with or encounter. as well as others from other backgrounds. So, I think that's a wonderful thing, and I appreciate that sort of expansion of my circles that has happened because I used this translation and talked about it. This particular edition here is a New Oxford Annotated Bible, which has very kind of scholarly notes, not necessarily notes that would confirm certain Christian perspectives. Again, it's a very ecumenical, scholarly kind of work. That doesn't bother me. There's things I've seen I don't agree with, or I think, well, that's not what I understand from the church. Well, that's great. It makes me stop in my tracks and look into it and learn, why do we believe certain things or say certain things mean what we say they mean. I found it really strengthens my faith and my biblical knowledge. So, yep. Yeah, and there's a lot of, I think, really cool additions. You see things that you wouldn't see with other translations, like here's a Jewish version. This is not a Messianic or Christian, but this is a, like Rabbinic Judaism annotated New Testament. They use the NRSV and provide, a different perspective in terms of the notes and articles. So I think that's really cool. I have not yet acquired the updated edition, the NRSVue, that came out in 2021. It's a terrible acronym. I somewhat tongue-in-cheek called it the NRSVue in a past video, and then someone in another video kind of poked fun at me for doing that, which isn't very nice. But they were going with, I think, NRSVue. That doesn't sound any better to me, but bad acronym is going to lead to bad pronunciations. I suspect as it gets printed more and becomes the kind of the de facto NRSV, they'll drop the UE or just emphasize it less. Whenever that happens, honestly, they just haven't been very quick to print them, have they? They've had a couple of years, and there's a few, but nothing that's really jumped out at me as something that I felt the need to spend money on. So at some point I'll get one. If not sooner, probably whenever Oxford updates the NOAB with it. And there's a lot of changes I've seen and heard about that I like. There's some I really don't like. Yeah, everybody knows the one in particular that has drawn a lot of controversy. Like I say, there's things I like, things I don't like about the NRSV, but I use it, I stick with it. This is my go-to Bible for kind of deep study and, digging into the text. And I'm currently reading through the New Testament again, and I'm using the NRSV this time around once again. So, okay, that's kind of a long video, and it's just a lot of me talking about a few Bible translations and what I think, and what are my qualifications to share that? Well, none. But if you found it informative or helpful or useful, I appreciate if you give the video a like. As always, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Agree, disagree? Do you have your own top translations that you prefer? Share it in the comments below. I love to hear different people's thoughts on these things. So, as always, God bless, and we'll see you for the next video. Thank you.